Republican on the Armed Services Committee and the Veterans Affairs Committees. Senator, thank you very much for coming on with us this morning. First off, I think my question would be, what do we do next?
I think we continue with the sanctions. The administration has taken the correct position, suggesting that until we actually see progress, we're not going to be changing our sanctions attitude. That's a step in the right direction. So we haven't taken any sanctions off. Sanctions are still in place. North Korea is still feeling the pressure. And if they want to play games with us, that's fine. They're not going to have any sanctions relief. At the same time, we're suggesting very clearly that we're prepared to negotiate with them, but the sanctions do not come off until we see progress.
But the progress is the question, right, Senator? Because we were led to believe through the State Department that we were seeing significant process. Here's Heather Nauert speaking on behalf of the State Department just days before the president canceled this trip. Listen.
The conversations continue. We have made significant movements over the past 6 months. In fact, we've had more conversations and consultations with the North Koreans in 6 months than we have in virtually the past 10 years. So we think we're on fairly strong footing here.
Obviously, the progress to which she refers is being called into question right now.
Yeah, look, I think it's one thing to say, look, we're moving forward, we're progressing in terms of negotiations themselves, but until we see actual progress, until we actually have clear evidence that they have started the dismantlement and that they actually start the denuclearization process, you're not going to see this administration, I don't think anyway, change the attitude that we've taken, and we're going to continue to have these harsh penalties in place when it comes to North Korea, and I don't think we should be changing that. Naturally, the president has at his disposal the ability to negotiate and to make deals, but clearly North Korea seems to have a differing point of view in terms of what their expectations are.
Senator, do you think that the North Koreans really are sincere that Kim Jong-un really wants to denuke? Here's the Washington Post editorial about that and about the president saying, Trump isn't expected to totally abandon diplomacy he began in his June 12 Singapore summit with Kim Jong-un. But unless Pyongyang responds positively to his latest move, Trump could side with officials who want to apply more pressure to the Kim regime through increased sanctions or other means, including National Security Advisor John Bolton. That's important because John Bolton once told me the joke, how can you tell if the North Koreans are lying? He says their lips are moving. So he's very clear-eyed and perceptive about the misguided North Korean intentions.
Yeah, look, there's clear evidence in the past that North Korea will talk, but they're not necessarily going to move away from their nuclear program. So, if we want to see progress, there has to be clear evidence that there have been changes in the nuclear program in North Korea itself.
Do you expect they'll do that? Do you think they actually will?
Time will tell. But in the meantime, we want to see the evidence that it actually happens. Simply saying they're going to is one thing, and that's the part that in the past they've talked to multiple presidents. We've hoped to have peace. We want peace. We want to see the peninsula there being denuclearized. But at the same time, we go into this with our eyes wide open. It has not happened in the past. We're still dealing with a regime which has found that presidents in the past have negotiated with them and in some cases have relaxed sanctions. This president's not going to do that.
You give them a carrot and they come back with a baseball bat. George W. Bush took them off the terrorist list, and that didn't work. President Clinton had the oil for food deal, and that basically didn't work. They just went straight ahead.
There's nothing wrong with negotiations, but in order to change the sanctions that we have in place, we want progress being made, and that means we want to see the first steps in denuclearizing the peninsula. And I think Ambassador Bolton is clearly the guy that understands that, and this isn't a matter of wanting to go to war. This is a matter of demanding that at some point we make the world safer by eliminating nuclear weapons in North Korea.
Next up, I want to ask you, Senator, about Iran's President Hassan Rouhani now vowing to overcome these newly imposed U.S. sanctions against Tehran. He said that they'll only serve to unify their nation, saying, quote, "We're not afraid of America or the economic problems. We will overcome the troubles." How do we respond to Iran?
We continue being consistent in the message that we've sent, which is the sanctions will remain in place and there will be new sanctions imposed on November 5th, I believe, is the date for the second round of sanctions. August 7th was the first round. November 5th is the second round. Look, what we've done is taken some pretty tough measures with them. These are impacting their economy. Their currency is worth about half of what it was, a little bit less than half of what it was in January of this year. The economy there is faltering right now. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they can't get access to international banking the way that they have in the past. Those are very important sanctions, and they are having an impact. The people in Iran are feeling the effects of this country's clear intervention in Yemen and in Syria as well.
You know, some of the opposition groups, Senator, though, there still are protests going on in Iran, and Tehran's behavior was absolutely outrageous. Two Iranians accused of targeting American citizens and the opposition group, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, here in this country. So what should the administration do about a regime that apparently targets Americans right here on our own soil?
The administration at this point has made it clear that they did not want regime change. And in fact, if you had regime change, you might very well end up with some hardliners or more hardliners than what's already there. So the administration, I think, does have an appropriate policy approach. They're simply saying, look, we're going to impose sanctions. We're going to see these guys actually start changing their attitude. And if they want to grow into the international economy, they're going to have to quit some of these excursions that they've taken into the other countries around them.
Do you think they'll ever really change? Do you think this theocracy will actually really ever change its behavior, this radical theocracy that has been ruling that nation since the revolution?
Look, our battle is not with the people of Iran. Our battle is with a ruling class right now which has this thought process of having for them an empire in the Middle East and having impacts on all of their neighbors. At the same time, if you take a look, just since the JCPOA was put in place back by President Obama, that JCPOA, Iran's increased their military spending by 90%. And so clearly they have intentions of having an impact on their neighbors. They've been actively involved in Syria, and in fact, they just most recently have announced that they're signing a deal with Syria to help support Syria.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, Senator, because this is a big deal. Iran and Syria got together in this meeting between the defense ministers, signed a deal for military cooperation. Iranian forces, as we know, backed Assad in the country's civil war, and it was U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, speaking of which, that said just last week that Iran should remove its forces from Syria. So what does this action tell you?
It codifies what's already been going on. They have been troublemakers in the Middle East with their neighbors. Our allies there have clearly seen the intent of Iran. They want the crescent moon. They want it they want to be a part of that throughout the entire Middle East. They are not our friends in terms of this regime, which is there right now. And right now, the best thing that we can do is to continue with these sanctions and allow the people of Iran to have influence on the government in Iran.
Syria and senior Iranian officials say that they have no immediate plans to withdraw there. Senator Rounds, thank you for coming on the program this morning. We appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Good to see you. Well, meanwhile, Michael Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, while we've been reporting this morning, he walked back his claim that the president knew in advance about that meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and the Russian lawyer. So how will that impact the Mueller-Russia investigation?
Plus, demoted DOJ official Bruce Orr right now behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, facing questions about the Trump dossier and his relationship with British spy Christopher Steele. Should he be relieved of his duties until the investigation is over?
For him to be in the Justice Department and to be doing what he did, that is a disgrace.
Right now, before a joint meeting of lawmakers from the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees. They want to know about his ties to ex-British spy Christopher Steele, the author of that unverified Trump dossier. Let's bring in our A-team this morning. There he is, Brad Blakeman, former Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush. Noah Rothman, Associate Editor of Commentary Magazine, and Michael Blakeman, DNC Vice Chair and New York State Assemblyman.
Welcome,
Wonderful
guys.
to have you all here
this morning.
So this is happening right now, right, Brad? Bruce Orr is sitting down. We saw him walk into the room this morning. We saw Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows on their way in. They are likely to be grilling him behind those closed doors.
Right.
What do you expect to come out of it?
Well, I'm anxious to hear the leaking that comes out of it, but as an American, I want to see them not behind closed doors. I want to see Orr in the hot seat where the world can see him.
Well, some say this gives the lawmakers a chance to, not put on a show for the TV cameras and ask the real questions, try to get some answers.
Well, I think that we could have gotten some real answers before the American people. And what I'm very much concerned about is Orr's relationship with Steele. When the FBI cut him off, Orr continued this relationship. Orr's wife was an employee of Fusion GPS. Mm-hmm. This whole dossier was used in order to surveil a political opponent of Hillary Clinton. This stinks from the top to the bottom.
Do you think there was a conspiracy here because you've got him meeting supposedly 60 times?
Absolutely.
Not meeting, but having texts and communications and meeting with Glenn Simpson and with Christopher Steele.
There's no doubt that the FBI at the highest levels was bending over backwards to do things that they would not do in any other case, and using information against a candidate for president. It's unheard of.
Right.
Do you buy that?
So let's make sure we just don't ignore what just happened. You just conveyed yes to the question on conspiracy, which is as ludicrous as this would sound right now. Let's talk about the facts of the matter. When we talk about how the warrant was issued, it was not because of the dossier, it was because of what happened with Papadopoulos. That was conveyed. Number one. Number two, when we think about credibility, clearly there's no real credibility when it comes to Devin Nunes and all that's been happening, especially when you talk about closed doors, behind closed doors in that aspect, saying we need to do these things to be able to protect President Trump. So I agree in the one aspect, of course, there should be transparency, but let's not ignore the critical element that was just conveyed, where you actually just said yes in agreeing that you think this is a conspiracy.
There's a conspiracy in the FBI. There's a conspiracy with
the question that was asked is, do you believe it's a conspiracy? The question was asked, do you believe this is a conspiracy?
Yeah, on the part of the FBI. That was the question.
And that's a pretty ludicrous statement to convey that you believe that there's a conspiracy happening.
Congressman Darrell Issa was on this program, and he suggested that that Bruce Orr and his wife Nellie Orr should admit, quote, that they were part of a conspiracy against Donald Trump. So this isn't just a theory of his. You're hearing this from members of Congress. I want to get Noah in here.
Yeah, what we know about Bruce Orr's relationship with Christopher Steele and when he talked to the FBI is it did, according to Justice Department officials on background, talked to ABC News, for example, they say it went beyond his remit. Nellie Orr was a consultant for a political consultancy. We don't know what her relationship was. She was a Russian speaker. She probably was contracted to do some Russian speaking work, and that's far from being an employee. Finally, though, and the most important point, I'm the only person on this panel who thinks we shouldn't be transparent about all this. We used an unprecedented maneuver to get the Nunes memo out of committee, another one to get the Schiff memo out of committee. We put a FISA memo in front of the public. According to the New York Times, Russian sources, America's sources that report to the CIA have gone to ground. We do not talk to them anymore as a result of perhaps, most likely in fact, the outing of a CIA informant who's a former Republican guy working at Cambridge University. This is all unprecedented. It's really bad for national security, and there's a reason why it's called a representative republic. We are not supposed to be privy to this information.
But as long as the American public doesn't have all the facts, they're in the dark. And some people think there's a conspiracy by the FBI to get Donald Trump. Others do not believe that at all, think it's all a political talking point. Doesn't the American people deserve an answer about what was going on in this government on both sides?
The responsibility for being clear to the American public falls on their elected representatives. We shouldn't be putting FISA memos in front of the public and allowing them to judge raw intelligence on its merits. That's not what they're supposed to do, and that's going to result in more confusion, more conspiracy thinking, and more distrust in the government.
Well, we spoke to Congressman Mark Meadows, who's fired up about all of this, on his way into that room this morning. I asked him, what is at stake?
When we really look at it, 99% of the DOJ and FBI workers are truly great patriots. And yet we have about 7 or 8 that took things into their own hand. And so it's the credibility of really Lady Justice that should have a blindfold. And yet we're seeing that they were peeking and trying to tilt justice one way or another based on their own political bias.
That's a lot.
Well, we talk about, again, political bias, Devin Nunes at a fundraiser conveyed that the Republicans need to keep the majority in order to protect Donald Trump and to avoid continual investigation. So if we want to talk about bias, let's talk about the ones that are overseeing the investigation. Now, I do acknowledge there's absolute legitimacy in making sure you have some information that is protected. I have no question about that. However, we can't ignore that there is confusion that exists, and whether it be having redacted material of some sort, some information should be out there. Why are you going behind closed doors, given the magnitude of what's happening right now?
Is there an argument, do you think, that there should be some release of material that's unredacted? You can protect sources and methods, but let some of this unredacted material get out there.
Look, there's no question that ordinarily, I would agree too, that sources, methods should be protected in order for the national interest. But not in this case, where there's a cloud over the FBI and the American people are outraged at the incestuous nature of the FBI getting involved in politics and using sources and methods that are really unheard of. So, yes, we need to open this up. And the cleansing, I think, will be helpful not only to the institutions, but also to restore confidence in our...
All right, well, that closed-door interview is going to go on for hours today. It was suggested by members of Congress as they were on their way in there this morning. So we'll see what comes out of all that. Meanwhile, the attorney representing Michael Cohen, Lanny Davis, got to ask what's going on with him, because he is now backtracking on some comments he made in an interview admitting that he was the anonymous source for that bombshell story on Trump Tower. Here he is on CNN.
Well, I think the reporting of the story got mixed up, and in the course of a criminal investigation, we were not the source of the story.
So he says the reporting on the story got mixed up. So backtracking on what he said earlier.
It's called lying. When you know you're the anonymous source, you're asked about it, you lie about it, it comes out you are the source. First of all, Lanny has a long history of partisan representation. Cohen, the last hire should be Lanny to represent you. And the fact is, Lanny played too cute, he lied, and now he's shot his credibility and he's hurting his client.
What if it's just a misstatement or he misremembered? You know these terms they use? It's a misstatement.
I
misremembered.
Doesn't pass the smell test.
Michael, he admitted he was the anonymous source to BuzzFeed. He said, "I made a mistake. I did not mean to be cute."
What's cute is when I listen to Republicans talk to me about lying or not lying. Let's go back to the actual focus of the element. The meeting was supposedly about Russian adoption. So now we're out here talking about Lanny Davis. At the end of the day, let's make sure we have a president of the United States. We have all those around him that have consistently lied about what's happening.
What do you think about Lanny Davis and what's happening here?
It's quite frankly secondary in the grand scheme of things. We're talking about
He's
him
the
being
attorney
a source.
representing Michael Cohen.
Michael Cohen, who was the attorney for the president of the United States, where they repeatedly lied throughout. So yes, we can acknowledge it is wrong for him claiming him from an anonymous source, but the more critical issue is that they lied throughout this entire effort.
This shouldn't be surprising to anybody. The second that Mike Cohen took a deal, Lanny Davis began chewing the scenery, being very dramatic and saying, "My client shall not accept a pardon from that rapscallion in the White House." He was being as theatrical as possible in order to ingratiate himself with the resistance, the Democratic left. And he was saying whatever felt good in the moment. And among those things is that my client has information about Russian collusion. That's what they wanted to hear. He was telling them what they wanted to hear.
Michael, do you think, final thoughts, that there was collusion, that meeting was a conspiracy with the Russian lawyer?
I won't use the word conspiracy, but we do know that they lied. I mean, they said it was about adoptions. They conveyed on Air Force One that they were working on it. So the reality is you have an administration and those around them that have been lying, and I think that is the core issue we should focus on.
Do you think that shows coordination with the Russian government?
We don't know that, but what we do know is that the Trump administration and those around him have been consistently lying about what's been happening in this effort.
All right, that is it for the first part of our A-Team. Thank you, guys. We'll see you again in just a few minutes.
Meanwhile, there's new details coming into America's newsroom on that horrible shooting in Jacksonville. What police are now saying this morning about some of the issues that may have led that suspect to open fire on his fellow gamers.
Plus, the market's reacting after the president announces a tentative new trade deal with Mexico. The Dow up again today, 34 points, adding to yesterday's big gain, sitting pretty above 26,000. Just ahead, Charles Payne on the potential impact on the economy and some stocks breaking records today.
So many market openings here. As I said, financial services, intellectual property rights, entrepreneurship. It's going to help the farmers. This is great stuff. Not tariffs. Market openings on both sides.
Switch to a Fox News alert because there's some new details emerging on that suspect from Sunday's horrible mass shooting at the Florida Jacksonville video game tournament. We're learning that that suspect, David Katz, while he had previously been treated for psychological and emotional problems, police say Katz did kill 2 of the gamers who were playing the games, competitors there, and he wounded at least 10 others when he opened fire before turning the gun on himself. Rick Leventhal live in Jacksonville at the shooting scene with the very latest. Hi, Rick.
And Eric, there's a news conference less than 30 minutes from now in a lawyer's office nearby announcing the intent to file the first lawsuit on behalf of one of the victims of Sunday's shooting here. And as you mentioned, we are learning a lot more about the gunman thanks to paperwork that was filed during the parents' divorce about 10 years ago. The gunman, David Katz, was hospitalized twice in psychiatric facilities as a teenager. He was prescribed meds for mental disorders. He was said to play video games till 4 in the morning, went days without bathing, was failing all of his classes, and fought often with his mother. Police called to the home at least 20 times. Police also say he bought those 2 handguns legally earlier this month from a licensed dealer in Baltimore, along with extra ammo and a laser sight. When he lost in that Madden 19 video game qualifying tournament, he left the venue and came back minutes later, passing other customers to target players in the back room, using one of the guns to shoot 12 and kill 2 before killing himself. The FBI and other law enforcement searched Katz's father's home in Baltimore for clues into why the young man snapped. Both parents said to be cooperating. Jacksonville Landing here is reopening today, and EA Sports last night, Eric, announced that it's canceling the next 3 Madden qualifying tournaments while it reviews its security protocol. Eric?
And meanwhile, Rick, what do we know more are we learning about the victims?
Well, the one victim who was in serious condition has been upgraded to good condition. Several people have been released from the hospital, and all of those who were wounded are expected to be okay. But of course, as you mentioned, 2 people were fatally shot here. They were 28-year-old Taylor Robertson and 22-year-old Elijah Clayton, both gamers, both played high school football. Clayton's cousin says he left behind 6 brothers and 3 sisters.
My cousin has to bury her firstborn. And it is just as terrible as that sounds. Our family has been forever changed. Nothing will replace the love that we have for Elijah. There is a hole that will never be filled.
She said Elijah loved football and had never been even in a fist fight, Eric.
Just so incredibly sad and tragic. Rick, thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Well, the battle for control of the Senate playing out today in Arizona and Florida. The A-team is back with a look at what to watch for as voters head to the polls in both states.
And the Russian dossier, the ex-spy in the U.S. Justice Department. This man, Bruce Orr, right now testifying behind closed doors on Capitol Hill. What is he saying to members of Congress? Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs is with us. He's a member of that committee questioning Mr. Orr, and he will tell us what he wants to hear in the next hour.